So Congress never did anything about it. This is what happens a lot in environmental regulations, is that Congress would never be able to sort of stand up and make a new rule to extend. So we're working with rules from the 90s and the 2000s. So they just rely on people within EPA at sort of changing their rules over time and using their mandate. There's a whole bunch of different lawsuits. So the big polluters can sort of delay things by just sort of holding up either statewide rules or the rules that specifically apply to their plant. But there's this air pollution ruling in 2011 that's sort of bringing the everything that I've showed you sort of into play. So things are adapting over time. They're still implementing this approach from 2005 that was talked about in the book. So how this relates back to the book is sort of looking at what levels of reduction are going to be implemented, what's the efficient level, and that was sort of the background of the policy debate of what's still happening now. So I just want to go in a little bit of like what does it mean to reduce sulfur dioxide, and there's two big ways that happens. One is changing to low sulfur coal, just coal that has less sulfur in it as a fuel source. The other is actually putting something on the smokestack, a smokestack scrubber, which reduces the sulfur dioxide emissions after combustion has happened. So here is an interesting one. This is the permit trading fee, right? So this is the fee that you have to pay to pollute a ton of sulfur dioxide. And so in the book, we're talking about 3,000 or 3,500 pounds as the efficient price that comes out in that cross line in the book. But here's just an interesting graph to say, as the price is going up in this way of the trading permit, the percentage that's in high sulfur coal goes down. So you change the type of coal that you put into your power plant. So here is before, when we had acid rain, we only had 35% in low sulfur coal. Here we are now, we're up to about 60% in low sulfur coal. So this is going forward in time over the period of all these different clean air regulations that I've been talking about. And the amount of low sulfur coal is going up, the amount of high sulfur coal is going down. And this green line here, I'll talk about a little bit. This is the Powder River Basin coal. So here is the coal in the United States. As I said, this is the dirt. This is sort of the region that we're talking about cleaning up their coal-fired electricity plants. This is Ohio. So eastern Ohio has this Appalachian coal, and some of these very dirty power plants are sort of situated right on top of where this coal was coming out of the ground. Western Pennsylvania, similarly, a bunch of dirty electricity there. This area here is called the Powder River Basin. This is where all the coal is coming from now. This is where the low sulfur coal is, and this is where we're moving all this coal. I'll show another map, but now the coal that supplies all these plants is moving on these huge trains across the country. Insane number of trains moving across the country. There is also an interesting, yeah, did you want to say something? Or the pollution from the big diesel trains, or the carbon embedded in the big diesel trains. Yeah, that's not figured in, right? They're just paying for sulfur dioxide at their plant. They're not paying like a life cycle analysis on coal. Sure. Some people have done that, but that's not like all the way deep into like EPA rulemaking. As I was just trying to say, it's just hard to get these rules implemented at all. When they are implemented, they're not implemented at this full efficient rate of like abating things down to only 1 million tons of pollution. We're at 5 million tons. So there's some other interesting things here in Illinois. There's this big amount of coal, so the price goes down and down for the high sulfur coal, right? So eventually, people aren't buying the whole high sulfur coal anymore. There's actually exports of coal right now going from Illinois out, down, and getting exported to China. So think about the life cycle analysis there. We have like restricted completely how much acid rain we want, and we priced out this coal that is worth it to somebody else to dig it out of the ground, ship it to the ocean, ship it around the world so China can burn it, right? That's pretty amazing. And especially when we're like, on the other hand, all this carbon should stay in the ground anyways. We shouldn't be taking any more carbon out of the ground, period. So yeah, here we have these little red triangles are the electricity plants of the East Coast and the Midwest, and these are just a huge, every one of these is like a train as long as you can possibly imagine of just coal cars. Like a train that would take like 20 minutes to go by of just coal cars that are heading out. So here we have, I was trying to show, these are like these plants that are basically on top of coal fields in Ohio and Pennsylvania that are now getting their coal from Wyoming. So in some ways the question is, we've cleaned up acid rain, but we haven't really changed the way we do things that much. We're still relying on cheap electricity from coal. It's just further away. Some of the costs are in running all these trains. So a lot of these things, one thing we can think about is we tighten up one regulation, but it has an indirect effect of causing other things to happen. You want to keep? Not really, not that much. Mostly natural gas. So we talked about this. I'm going to talk about this again, but I showed this data from the independent system operator. And yeah, we don't have a lot of coal plants in California. It's not a big part of our mix historically because it wasn't a resource that we had. Yeah, there's some from Nevada. There's also, there are coal plants in Arizona. Yeah, so here's one in Nevada, and then there's some coal plants somewhere in Nevada, in Arizona. So we bring in out-of-state power that, isn't part of Cal EPA, and there's like some 20 or 30% of out-of-state power that I think does have a big coal contributor to it. But again, this is an interesting thing as transport goes, where, here are the areas that we're trying to clean up of air pollution. And so if Arizona is polluting and the air is going this way, this isn't part of like us worrying about that. We still need to clean up fire rings and diesel trucks and stuff before it's a big impact on us. Certainly we should tighten, there's a lot of this, whether we should tighten up use of out-of-state power as a way to increase the amount of renewables that we use in California. And then just while I'm doing the map, there's also this natural gas boom going on, like the fracking, the Bakken. So this is in North Dakota. And just to say, while we're here, there's a similar map where there is a huge amount of natural gas coming out of the Bakken. And that's going, like this all over the East Coast too. Like the price of natural gas is lower. So we have this new area for coal, and we have this new area now for natural gas. So everything's like being transported out of that area. So what's a scrubber? So this is the big fixed cost implement. Changing your mix of coal is a variable cost thing. You're filling up your power plant, and you're paying a higher price for fuel. You're changing your variable cost line. Scrubbers are like the hundreds of millions of dollars in fixed cost. So you have some place that you're burning coal, and here's like the big smokestack here in the back. So there's some sort of, this is attached to some sort of smokestack. And instead of going up the smokestack, you trap it, and you send it through a chamber where you have lime water trickling down. And then after that, you send it up the smokestack. So this is something you put between where you're combusting the coal and the actual smokestack, where it's going to get trapped by this water with lime in it. And that's going to trap the salt. There's a chemical equation where the sulfur dioxide gets trapped in here, and the treated gas goes out. So they have to do these in such big scale that they're hundreds of millions of dollars to put these onto a big plant. So this is somebody did a survey and looked at all the different plants, how much it was costing them. These are for different plants. This is looking at this is numbers of plants, and these are capital costs, and these are different sizes of plants. So this is $300 per kilowatt, $320 per kilowatt. So these are hundreds of millions of dollars to put these onto your existing plant. And then here we are is with just the output of what our sulfur dioxide emissions are by coal plants. So in Ohio, which is sort of our bad boy target area to think about, we still have a whole bunch of sulfur dioxide still being emitted. So this is the scrubber. This is we're going to put in a scrubber, we're building a scrubber, and this is no scrubber. So we have a whole bunch of red dots still, right? We have a whole bunch of places where they can buy permits. We still have 5 million tons of pollution out there, so we have a whole bunch of places where they can buy permits and still keep their dirtier plant polluting. The amount of permits is getting smaller over time, so you could think of this, if you could see this graph over time, more red dots would be turning to more green dots as more and more install scrubbers. But if we look at this, there's still a whole bunch of plants without scrubbers. They're mostly meeting their goals through changing their coal source and little by little also buying the permits. So here's dividing it up into coal that's been scrubbed, coal that's been unscrubbed, and then this is the dirty coal, and this is the cleaner coal. So this is as a mix of electricity generation. So there still is this whole chunk of electricity that's coming from dirty coal and not going through a scrubber. But if we look at this is a graph that compares the total amount of electricity that's being produced, billions of kilowatt hours, and then here is of all of the emissions, right? So this unscrubbed dirty coal is a much smaller amount of electricity. Like let's say this is a tiny amount of our electricity mix, but a huge amount of the millions of tons that's being polluted, right? So this is, if we look at this is like the 3.5 million tons that are coming from places without scrubbers, and this is 1.5 million tons that are coming from places with scrubbers. So this is our 5 million tons on this side that we are currently emitting and trying to get down to. We saw socially efficient was 1.1 million tons. We saw the regulation trying to get to 3.6 and 2.5 million tons of emissions. So as I said, the other thing that we have, because this has been going on for long enough, we have huge health benefits that we can measure and we can show, right? Premature mortality. So this is tens of thousands of people that did not die. So premature mortality is probably older age people that died early because of some respiratory thing that was aggravated by pollution. But in people's lives, this is like a big number of people's lives. This is heart attacks of people that didn't die but still like living with a heart attack. The cost of heart attack is huge. Emergency room visits, bronchitis. This is just respiratory health in general, and then asthma, right? So asthma is getting to younger people, right? Some of these are going to be older people or immunocompromised people, but 400,000 people not having like a higher level of asthma or a bad asthma attack, that's widespread. That's a lot of people. So we have some pretty big estimates on these health effects. And we can talk when we get to the end to talk about cost benefit. Well, we can think about these kind of how we measure these or how we measure these up against a regulation. So here, just like there is trading in these permits. This is just a short time series that I found. We were talking about things at the time of the rule was going in, but the rule regulated out. But so there is variation in this permit price. This is a permit market that's being traded. People need to buy permits for pollution going forward. So we can also look at graphs like this about carbon when we get to that section. But now we have that things are in a market. They're being traded, bought and sold all the time. Different things affect markets. There could be like what's happening with the price of coal, what's happening with the price of electricity, what's happening with the economy in general. So this is our pollution price of our tradable permit. What we'll do in this class, this sort of thing like where do the lines cross? That's what the permit price should be. We're here. This person's paying this much for this. We're going to solve for that price. But it's just interesting now that we can go and look at time series data of what the price is, right? So this equilibrium price that we'll solve for in a simple case in this class, there's data of like, this is being solved by market buyers and sellers and power plant owners on a continuous basis, and there's, real-time data of this moving up and down. So here we think about going back to this graph. So if this is back to like sort of thinking about motivating this through coast. So if we could require the total amount to be abated, right? The efficient was 1.1 million tons of pollution, and the total amount was 9.1 million tons. So the dead weight loss here is this triangle from putting too high of a price on sulfur dioxide. So the environmentalists are getting 3.85 billion tons, $8 billion of value. The polluter is going to have to pay up here. This is 1 million tons times a $7,000 price up at the top. So if we have our Kosian case, where we're going to have a transaction between the two parties, and the environmentalists own it, and they're going to require complete cleanup, and they could negotiate over this triangle. The polluter, the polluting industry, could pay something less than $7 billion and something more than this $4 billion to make a trade over this dead weight loss triangle. If the coal companies are allowed to pollute as much as they want to, but society is worth $3,500 to reduce the amount of coal, then this dead weight loss triangle, this is the dead weight loss triangle of having unrestricted coal emissions, then the environmentalists are willing, or society or the people trying to protect the environment or protect public health are willing to negotiate and split up this triangle somehow and make some sort of payment to bring them up and exchange, so millions of tons abated, so we're somewhere in here at 5 million tons that we have left, and 4 million tons have been cleaned up. So what we have done is put the costs that we're imposing on the power plants into the price of power. So we don't do it as like, we're public health, we're environmentalists, we're making a payment to reduce asthma. We say we're putting regulations on there so that the power companies will face a higher price and drive them, to abate more and more, and we're going to pay for that in the price of power. We're going to allow that to be sort of priced into the price of power. But we're willing to pay as a society, this is only $500 to clean up the first ton. So that's worth it to us, right? And it's worth, $1,000 to clean up the second million tons. And it's worth it to us to pay that in our power prices because of the amount of gains in human health that we're getting back from this dead weight loss. So this is back to the Coase theorem, right? This is back to, could you just spontaneously have a trade? So if we go to the Coase theorem, we say people will be able to make a negotiation and trade to get to a more efficient point. So if we don't have any trading, we'll have one of the dead weight loss triangles. We'll either have complete cleanup and the power company would have cleaned up too much, or we'll have no cleanup and we'll have these huge public health burdens. So these dead weight loss triangles are just out there whether or not it's possible to make a trade. And then we have this thing, who owns it? Who starts with the initial allocation? Who has the property rights to the pollution? Determines where we're going to allow, where there's going to be welfare gains, right? If people are if they're able to give us the full price for removing the dead weight loss triangle, our welfare is going to go that much because we're going to be paying this really high price. So there's a whole bunch of transaction costs in having this work out. And this is often why the Coase theorem fails. It's too hard to make a deal. There's some costs above just the price. So we think it's $3,500 per ton. We can sort of come up with a model of what the price is going to be, but it's too hard to make these trades happen. So some of the transaction costs will be like search costs, information costs, bargaining costs, policing and enforcement costs. So individual people with asthma aren't going to find the power company in Ohio that sent the particulate into their lungs, figure out who the owner is, make a bargain with that owner, and then be able to enforce that bargain later. So these sets of costs are what make it really hard for some sort of Coasean solution to exist. Defining, what the right price is, who should be paying it, making some negotiation with them, enforcing a contract later. So I could shake on a deal, make a payment. How do I know that that payment's going to be enforced? How do I know that they're not going to go back on it later? Here's my empathetic example. Can a child with asthma in Pittsburgh negotiate a deal with the owner of a power plant in Ohio? So we had this Coasean idea that deals can be made, but in general, it's very hard to get them to be made in real life. So that's why we have the EPA setting up markets, and the markets are going to be a way that are going to reduce. I can just go. The companies can just go on this market for sulfur dioxide permits. We're going to set it up and make it clear so the transaction cost with each trade will be really low, and the EPA is going to take care for me of policing and information and enforcement costs. The EPA is going to take care of measuring things, making sure that permits are followed. The federal government is going to be behind the pollution permit and sort of backing it with their enforcement. So we have a few things in the Chapter 11 graph. This one was a loss that if they set the price up here, so what would be the government revenue, they could set a very high price, 6,600 tons for pollution, and less than 1 million tons would be polluted. This much would be revenue. And we can talk about this later too. The government would get that much money, so the government might have some interest to the extent that the government agency is able to create power with the size of its budget. They might be setting prices in different places trying to maximize the revenue. Generally, we want to get to the efficient point, not maximize government revenue with these pollution taxes. And so here we are with sulfur dioxide moving down. Sulfur dioxide base case without the regulation, sulfur dioxide with a tradable permit, 44% reduction. And then we talk about, in the same graph, introducing nitrous oxides. And that's what comes in the next chapter, is looking at reductions in nitrous oxides. So they're at a much lower level, but we're getting actually a bigger reduction from the base case, a 60% reduction from the base case in nitrous oxides. So sulfur dioxide trading was super successful. They added nitrous oxide trading into it as well, and they're going to do some trading on nitrous oxides and tradable permits on those as well. That will bring us into the chapter 12. But so what we can think about in this graph before we get to chapter 12 is sulfur dioxide, the vast majority of sulfur dioxide was going to be covered by this rule, right? A little bit is coming from transportation, but mostly it's all these big stationary sources, coal-fired electricity. This is in sulfur dioxide. In the nitrous oxides, this big stationary sources is just a small percent of the pollution. And trucks, transportation, tractors, trains, is a much bigger share, right? So this is the critique that we're motivating for chapter 12 is that these regulations on air quality are just focusing on a small share of the nitrous oxide emissions, and they're not going after this if we're talking about efficiency. So in chapter 12, it moves from sulfur dioxide to nitrous oxides, and some of what we talk about is there's different types of regulation, there's different costs of regulation, and there's different politics for different types of regulation, right? So transport's more of an issue, but perhaps in Washington or in the EPA, regulating trucks is more difficult. And the sulfur dioxide, you could set up a permit scheme, you could set up a market. It's easier to do that because then the polluters are trading. With nitrous oxides, when you have transportation versus coal plants and different types of transportation, it's harder to have this market-based solution. There's a whole bunch of different sectors that are involved.